Welcome to the TRXL podcast. I'm Evan TRXL, and in this episode, I welcome Mariusz Hermansdorfer. Mariusz is an architect engineer who spent the better part of his career inside the Ramboll Group, most recently as Head of Computational Design at Henning Larsen in Copenhagen. He's also got an industrial PhD, the kind where you split your time between academia and practice for a few years and then pull the research back into real projects. But his story goes back about 20 years to when he was an engineering student handed an assignment to design a dam. Instead of designing one dam, he built a software pipeline to design many of them. He took 10 times longer than everybody else, and he loved every minute of it. That instinct, taking the mundane out of the work so people can focus on the part that actually matters, is the thread that runs throughout everything we talk about. Last October, that thread became a company. Mariusz spun Jifto out of Henning Larsen as its first ever tech spinoff, and it's also the first spinoff in the history of the much larger Ramboll Group. Jifto is a personal sustainability assistant that lives inside Rhino, where designers already work. It runs wind, stormwater, microclimate, sunlight, and biodiversity studies in the early design stages. The analysis that used to take a specialist days to set up, and it does it with an AI companion sitting on your shoulder the whole time. In this episode, we explore what it actually takes to turn an internal tool into a product the rest of the industry can use. We talked about the long road and dedication it takes to get a 750-person architecture firm to let go of control and let a startup spin out, the translation layer between how designers think and how engineers deliver, and why Mariusz is betting on the 80% of sustainability questions instead of specialists. What I appreciated is how human his reasoning stays underneath all the software. He returns more than once to a story about a man who endowed a park because he had his first kiss there, and by the end he frames his whole company as a way to help architects build more places for people to kiss. That's a strange and wonderful thing to hear from someone who writes code for a living, and it's exactly the kind of conversation I love having on this show. As usual, there's an extensive amount of additional information in the show notes, so please be sure to check that out. Paid supporters of TRXL Plus can find them directly in their podcast app, along with their ad-free episodes. And if you're a free member, you can find the show notes and links over on the website, which is trxl.co. And now, without any further ado, I bring you my conversation with Mariusz Hermansdorfer. Mariusz, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you very much, Evan.
Yeah, so let's talk about architect turned software developer. Was this the plan? Was this something that you've always been interested in, or did you grow into this, or did this happen to you? I'm curious because not many firms, I think, make the commitment of actually becoming software developers and even spinning out a separate entity and products and all of those things, where this is obviously led. It'll be more obvious to the audience after they hear your story, But was this something that was in the cards for you for a long time, or was this something that happened to you?
There's this great talk by Steve Jobs when he says, he talks about connecting the dots, but you can only connect them looking backwards.
Right.
And now that I look backwards from today's perspective, I think it was in the cards. It was kind of meant to be. But as I collected these dots, I just never realized that this is the destination. And most likely this is also not the final destination, right? This is one of the steps along the way.
Right.
But what I mean by this is I was always fascinated by, building things that kind of, so I studied engineering, and even during my engineering classes, I remember there was this one particular assignment about, design a dam, right? And every single colleague of mine would just design a dam versus I built a software pipeline to design multiple dams, right? And it took
You're
me...
like, don't worry, everyone else in the class, I've got it covered for you. You can then use my software to do the studio project.
I didn't want to mention it, but I did receive a few calls the day before the hand-in. And then, without mentioning any names, there is a few of these projects that went through the pipeline, right? But the cool part about that for me was I had no clue about coding, like some basic Python skills back then. It was also like 20 years ago, right? And it took me 10 times the time that I would have just done one thing, right? But it was just something that I always was fascinated by. How can we optimize? How can we make the mundane more fun, and focus on the actual contribution, right? And not going through the motions every single time. And then as got more experience in the industry, like I was always the kind of like a go-to guy in any office that I was part of, like trying to help others, right? Okay, I just learned this skill. I watched a lot of tutorials about different pieces of software and whatnot, and I was just always looking over someone else's shoulders, maybe the annoying kind as well. And I was saying, you're doing it like this. Why don't we try it, in a different way?
Yeah.
And it kind of like started getting bigger and bigger. Eventually led me to leading computational design at Henning Larsen, and kind of trying to spread the word globally. And last year, my back then bosses and we started having conversations about why don't we make something more concrete out of this? Why don't we dedicate more energy and resources to make it happen and sharing it with the world?
That's another differentiator, right? It's like there's building tools to serve your own company that stay in the company, and then there's this whole other thing of actually making it available to others. And then, before we actually hit record, you're talking about doing support, right? And now you have to support other users and solve the problems of all the edge cases create and things like that. I want to go back to the beginning though. Like you spent, I think you said 10 times more time
at least.
Right. And so what was that? Like what made it so that, number one, that was okay? I mean, I can only assume that like it was kind of a wicked problem and it just fully engulfed all of your time you were so interested in solving it in that way versus spending your time on the design of the dam for a one-off instead, right? Like those are two different things.
Yeah. I guess it's like multiple aspects coming together here, right? It gives me a kick when I see that I can empower others, and through that I would see, there is a, especially when you're a student, you're hanging out with your peers, and everyone is struggling with this particular thing. So I'm thinking like, if I solve this, I could make their lives easier, and you have this direct connection, and you see the results immediately, right? So that was something that I do realize that I like helping people, and there's multiple ways of doing this. This is my contribution, kind of like I like to think of it as my contribution to the world. At the same time, I also feel like scale is important, and I realized that later in my career. I was super lucky to be working for very, very good offices, and then we had amazing projects all over the world, right? Different scales, different typologies. But one thing that I realized is, first of all, not everyone has the opportunity in our business industry, right, to work on like fun things, and multiple practical reasons for that. And also, even if I had a streak of amazing projects, one by one, I would only be able to influence over my lifetime, a handful, right? Whatever, it's in the dozens, right? Versus if I make the tools for other architects, and there's 4 million of them, right? Then the leverage, the multiplier is so much bigger, right? And that's where I realized, okay, this is what I want to be part of. Because both seeing the pain that we can help people, and also kind of like from the ego point of view, being part of a bigger thing then. And I guess there's different takes on it, because I really like working with like open space design, not necessarily a building, right, but everything around it, because it is accessible to everyone. And then I'm also thinking of this leverage. It's going to be there for at least 100 years. How many, millions of people hopefully are going to use this space? And I remember there was this one guy, forgot his name. He made an endowment for the Central Park in New York City. I think $100 million or something like this, right? And then he was asked, like, what was your motivation behind it? And he mentioned that he had his first kiss in this park, 8 years back. And he would like other people to be able to kiss there in the future. And it stuck with me, right? And it's one of these things where I'm just thinking like, this is why we design these spaces, for other people to kiss, right?
I love it. That's really cool. I mean, there's a lot of software companies, I think, in the AEC space that are born out of that desire to, I call it going from working in the profession to working on the profession. Like that's my version of you could be working in a firm, working on projects, But you're very much in this kind of, you know, you've got this momentum and you've got deadlines and you've got these projects, and it's very hard to kind of step back and get a bigger perspective, the one that you're talking about, right? Which is helping other people, give other people leverage, because then the force multiplier is that much bigger if you can enable others to do things with tools that they can then, you know, make great design and make great places for people to kiss, right? So to be able to step back and say we're gonna do this for the industry, for the profession, for however you want to frame that in a much bigger scale, is a different mindset, right? Because there's many different incentives why people get into developing tools for a vertical, right? Like it could be money, right? It could be giving people tools that help design a better world. It could be lowering carbon. It could be so many different things, right? So it's really that kind of that drive that sits underneath it all. I think it really speaks to the story here. It sounds really cool.
Well, yeah, and you know, everyone, as you mentioned, everyone has their own motivation. Part of why we then decided, together with Henning Larsen, we decided to outsource this sustainability package was because we also realized that we are sitting on a treasure chest. That's I mean, there's a history of sharing, like, culture from Henning Larsen. Maybe it's the Scandinavian heritage, maybe it's just a company. There are multiple reasons for it, but we would open source a lot of our research. We would participate in different innovation projects with academia and publish and so on. But then what we notice is that there's still a lot that kind of like is only accessible to our team. And why is it gated? You know, and especially like multiple other like big offices, then they definitely can afford similar specialist teams and they would develop their own tools. But there is, you know, thousands of smaller offices that just cannot afford that, right? Yeah. And then they rely on external consultants. Very often they're just not available. The client doesn't want to pay. You know, like there's a lot of reasons why architects would then not follow through, maybe with some sustainability ambitions. And that goes back to the scale idea. We as an office, we also said, hey, there's only so much that we can do as an office, and only so many projects that can go through us, versus if we empower the rest of the industry and hopefully, you know, like start the snowball effect, that if we kick it off, then maybe others will join and it will just become a bigger and bigger thing. You know, earlier today I was talking to Jens from Motif. I know you had him on the pod some time ago. We're already talking about like this idea by architects for architects. Mm-hmm. And then he was involved in some prior initiatives in organizing architects around essentially just saying maybe no to some software monopolies out there and standing up. And we want to be part of that movement in our way, right? And in a kind of like a creative take on it. Not necessarily saying that whatever has been done before was wrong, but just saying that maybe the new era, especially now with AI, right, opening up a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of unknowns, and we want to be able to contribute our version of the future that we want to see.
Yeah. Talk about Henning Larsen and kind of where you guys were before you started this. I mean, obviously you're developing tools in-house and things like that, but give us an idea of what Henning Larsen does. And then, because I'm curious about kind of what it takes to get an idea like this through a company like that. Because I think a lot of companies are like, yeah, we develop stuff too that we could see being useful for others out there. There's a lot to that story. There's a lot of things you want to consider. And so I think you're a great person to kind of take us through that.
Also, Henning Larsen was a person. He lived in the or worked in the post Second World War Denmark, and he started as a classical architect, you know, building oriented. But then the office grew and grew and grew, and right now we are around 750 practitioners across multiple disciplines, architecture obviously, but as the office became more involved in bigger projects, it like people realized like we need to take care of the whole package, including landscape, urban planning, interior design, you name it. We have still very strong roots in Scandinavia, but multiple offices across the world. There's one in New York City in the US. There is Hong Kong, Asia, Singapore, Australia, and so on. But the culture is driven by curiosity, right? And it was always about asking questions about how can we improve, what can we do better. And I was super lucky to join an already established structure, and credits to Jakob, who essentially created this innovation department, I guess 15, 20 years ago. And this is a super nice place to be part of, because it's a mix, right? The office is mostly, let's call them, let's say, designers, right? But this is actually the unit that I was part of is mostly engineers, or at least architects that like to think as engineers, or engineers that like to think as architects, right? And we have an in-house industrial PhD program, for example, that I think right now we're approaching 20 PhDs in the last roughly 15 years. I myself am one of these. And the idea is that for a period of 3 to 5 years, you're kind of like sharing your time between academia and practice. And your thesis is then informed by practice, and the other way around. You try to bring back the research into our project, and ultimately inform both individual projects, but also like the bigger picture is that influence the way the office works. And it can manifest itself in multiple different aspects. You mentioned a few of these, for example, lowering your carbon. How do we talk about carbon, right? One thing is the quantities, while the other one is the communication. And it could also be something more about social aspects, right? What are the needs of the local community? How can we address that? How can we bring these questions and an approach to even getting the answers from them into our design process, and how can we integrate it? So that's the bigger unit, and the amazing thing about that is that most of it was centralized in Copenhagen, which means that when you're part of this crew, you just feel the energy, you feed off each other, and so on. But that was also one of the biggest bottlenecks, right? Because all the satellite offices, they didn't have that much access to, or it was just more difficult for them to go through us. And at the same time, imagine you have a unit of 15 to 20 people, and you have 700 colleagues kind of asking questions to you, right? Then you become a bottleneck on different projects. So that's one of the reasons why we also then decided, well, we need to use digital technologies to help us help others. And whether it meant creating different templates, pipelines, workflows, mostly like at that time when we started, and there was also colleagues before me who started doing this, we were talking about internal facing tools. Mm-hmm. And the complexity kind of grew as the team became more and more confident in our own abilities. But then the talks to go outside of the office, that only started, I think, like 1.5 years ago. Okay. When we then said, also to credit others, right? Like there were some colleagues before me who had floated similar ideas, but I think the office back then wasn't ready, right? For multiple reasons.
What does that mean? I'm curious, really curious what those, I mean, it might be sensitive, so I get it, but I'm just curious, what would those kinds of reasons be where it's like, okay, we're not ready, and then 1.5 years ago, we are ready? Like, what's the tipping point there?
Well, the not ready part is easy to explain, right? Because primarily you're a designer, you're in an office that focuses on delivering projects, right? Mm-hmm. And then like no one there is a specialist in creating products. Right. No one, like, especially digital products, development of these, like there's a lot of unknowns in the process, and can be a distraction, right? So when you're trying to pick your battles, you choose the ones that you feel confident with. So I totally understand that. I like to think that the reason why jifto became what it is today, and the decision was made, was because there was a convincing messaging behind that. But I would be lying if I didn't credit the people behind who kind of like poked the bear. And maybe it's like Inception. The idea had to take some time to grow in their heads, and then I just happened to hit the fertile ground.
How many levels deep did you go to plant the seed? How many dream layers? 5 layers down did you go?
Well, it was deep, right? The Inception, right? The deeper you go, the longer the time kind of like
slows,
you perceive
it slows down the farther.
Longer.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. So it felt like it took forever, but it was most likely 10 to 12 months of conversations that we had, like specifically about that. And I'm just trying to be mindful of what I'm saying, but it's a first, right, in the history. And also to give a broader context, Henning Larsen is an architectural office that's part of a bigger Ramboll Group that's an engineering company. And so in the history of Ramboll, the way it kind of like grew was also through acquisition. So I believe we are the first ever spin-off from both Henning Larsen and Ramboll. If anything, then other companies got acquired.
Nice. Okay.
And so everyone understands that because we're the first, there's just no template to follow, right? We had to make a lot of assumptions, and we said we're just going to be taking things one by one, understanding that probably there will be more optimal ways of doing it, but hopefully this will pave the way for the future initiatives, future colleagues who would maybe come up with different ideas, maybe much better than mine. And then they would say, well, let's just talk to the guy, let's learn from his experience. And hopefully it will be something that in the future will be also available to others.
This episode is made possible with support from Part 3. If you're an architect, you already know construction administration is where projects get messy. Documents buried in inboxes, files scattered across drives or GC software, no clear record of who approved what. It's slow, it's risky, and it's costing your firm time, fees, and trust on every project. Architects deserve better tools for CA, and that's why Part 3 exists. Part 3 is the construction administration platform built for architects, not contractors, not owners, architects. They automate the grunt work behind submittals, RFIs, drawings, and field reports, so your team spends less time clicking and more time designing. It works alongside Procore, Deltek, and Bluebeam, so nothing breaks, but you maintain full control of your data. Submittals get reviewed faster with AI assistance, RFIs get responded to 30% faster, site reports go out in about an hour, straight from the job site. Over 150 leading architecture firms already trust Part 3 to protect their profit, reduce their risk, and keep construction moving. Take back control of CA. Book a demo at part3.io. That's PART3.io. My thanks to Part 3 for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. Now let's get back to the conversation. How long have you been at Henning Larsen, and do you think that length of time was necessary for you to be involved in kind of the way things were to effectively transition into the way things are now? Or do you feel like you could have been, hired right as this project was coming on board and jumped into it? How much of that previous experience do you think was necessary for it to be?
I think so it was 13 years that I was part of the bigger Ramboll Group, and I started an office called Atelier Dreiseite, that later became part of Henning Larsen. So I had the prior exposure to also multiple Ramboll colleagues, multiple offices across the world, and then I spent 3 years at Henning Larsen in Copenhagen. So it definitely helped, and I'm not sure. Well, first of all, like professionally, I grew to that point. I connected the dots, or I collected the dots to later connect them.
Okay.
Had it been earlier in my professional career, I just wouldn't have been ready to do that. The PhD has helped a lot as well. So the transition happened a year after I defended my PhD.
The PhD helped because of the subject matter or because of what?
Well, the subject matter was part of it, but I think there was also exposure to just different, way of thinking, academia, understanding that maybe they're struggling even more than we do in practice, right? With all the things that I mentioned, like lack of workflows, lack of access to expertise, and so on. But also seeing, I love working with kids, right? As in, the 20-year-olds who just are passionate about things, and then seeing the passion there, and then also seeing, okay, but you guys, you bring so much idealism into the industry, and then you're hit with procedures and reality and all these, and it just sucks the spirit out of you, right?
Yes.
And we want sustainability to be fun, right? We want it to be sexy, and not something that's mundane and associated with like boring procedures and checklists and so on. And if we don't do a better job at inspiring or just fueling the fire that the young generation has, then that's on us essentially, right? We should be giving them something to work with. But going back to your previous question, right? I think what helped tremendously was the personal relationships that I was able to build with the people, especially because it's the first, right? So there has to be mutual trust, right? Because we don't know what we're doing. So we need to trust each other that we'll figure it out along the way. And I think like this is what I really, really appreciate about just working there in this environment. Again, it might be the Scandinavian mentality, super flat hierarchies, very open, approachable people, very, work-focused mindset as well. So everyone, it's all fun, but at the same time, like, we're super professional, and very high level of trust, right? So this is like, we do have some in terms of funding, right? There's a financial relationship that we have, obviously between our companies, but it's a completely different experience than, I don't have personal experience with venture capitalists or whatnot, but honestly, like there was never any question about ROI on that. If anything, it was more about the impact that it will make.
Yeah.
And this is also something that speaks volumes about the company.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea of collecting the dots, building relationships over time, the PhD program, that kind of the giving people incentives to aspire to. Incentivizing aspirational kind of outcomes or ways of working. All of these things really speak to this culture that is obviously like the key ingredient here. It seems to me like, man, it just sounds really, really impressive, because it's like it would be very difficult to say, we're going to make this exact company, like this company has grown into this company and you've been along for the ride for 13 plus years, right? And you are one of the chefs in the kitchen, like creating this recipe for this culture to happen. And I think that, so my question about like how important was it for you to have been there? It's super important. Like this is, and instead of hiring a software developer from the outside and then getting some brand new kind of, without having established those relationships and that timeline and all of that cultural stuff, I think is, that kind of speaks to me, like something that people should be paying attention to if they're thinking about doing something like this.
For sure. And also just, again, that we're building a product for architects by architects. So just hanging out and exchanging with as many architects as possible and really understanding their pain. That's something that only comes through essentially years of exposure. Mm-hmm. And still, we said it off mic. I'm interacting with other offices right now, different scale. So from the biggest logos to literally just 2 to 5 people shows. And this is just fun to see what are the different reactions, right? What are the different pieces of feedback that we receive? What are the projects that they will work with? How do they envision the application and so on? And this is something very humbling because I do understand that Henning Larsen is it's a great office, but it's just a subset of architecture that happens there, right? And there's just so many different, even though we work across multiple geographies, but it's still very filtered. We're in a privileged position to be able to select the work that comes to us, right? Many offices are just not in this position. They also just have different ambitions and so on, right? And then just the definition of sustainability. What does it even mean, right? It just means different things depending on who you ask. And so that's also it's a fine line to balance, to say we believe we have something to offer, while at the same time being humble enough to listen to others what they would like us to be, right? And trying to not lose the identity that we come from while following the market needs, right? Because like one of the things that I am very aware of now running this business is part of the sustainability definition for me is that I need to sustain the business, right?
Yeah, right.
And especially if I'm talking about impact, right? It's something that, if it only is a bright flame that lasts for half a minute, we haven't made the impact that we're aiming for, right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean individually for every single one of these offices? How can we help them? That's a lot of interviews that I'm going through right now.
I want to talk about jifto, but I want to get there by talking about kind of how you guys decided that it was time to do jifto, to actually spin it off, like you said earlier. So to kind of take us through that process of, obviously you were developing tools internally for the internal teams, and there was something that happened that said, okay, now is the time, now was the right time. I'm sure that had a lot to do with the people involved who were at the table, but also I'm sure there were other things as well that kind of made it happen.
Yeah, well, many things. The product started getting maybe more and more interesting as it matured over time, and then we saw that we're maybe hitting some milestones that made it appear maybe a little bit bigger than we initially thought it's going to become. And then it's a question of maintenance. Who is going to maintain it? Like, can we allocate resources to it? How are we going to finance this? Internally, should it be only this one central unit who should carry the whole cost and spread it across other units? Should we make our colleagues pay to use it? All these kind of like internal questions. And the answer was always no. We want it to be as easy for them as possible. At the same time, we are already a bottleneck in terms of our colleagues want us to maybe do some of these analysis for them. And then so our priority, again, from the office point of view, the priority is to work on projects. And it's very difficult to balance, especially if there's a tight deadline. Then, of course, all hands on board, you jump on there. But then if it happens too often, you just don't have time to sustain the development. Mm-hmm. And then the thing about software is that it never stops, right? There is no point in time that you can say it's complete.
Right.
And then so if you don't continuously invest energy, and the bigger it becomes, the more energy you need to pour into the maintenance of it, the less relevant it becomes over time. So the inflation rate is relatively high with software. And so that's one. The other thing is, I think personally, I was also ready to take it on, because ultimately it boils down to, of course, there's an idea, but there needs to be someone behind that idea, right? Who will drive it?
Somebody who owns it, right? Like it has to be their main thing, right? Otherwise, it's nobody's main thing, and it just atrophies.
And that's one thing that we also realized, that everyone is driven by different motivations, and there's a lot of architects who who just want to do architecture, right? So they might have just this one great idea that they think is great, right? They would say for like optimization or some improvement or whatever. And they would suggest it to us, but they don't want to take ownership long-term of it, right? They are perfectly happy in handing it over and waiting for someone to develop it. But the problem with that is that it's very difficult to do it in the right way for someone else, right? Because you don't know the pain as good as they do. And then so we can try and help them, right? But long term, you just need an owner, right? Someone who believes in it and who wakes up excited every single day and says, I want to make it 1% better, 1% better, 1% better. And then over time, it compounds. And whether it's a positive or negative trait, I tend to be this guy who wakes up excited about making incremental improvements every day. And then so the product was ready or getting there. I think I was personally ready. And as I mentioned, the ecosystem of people around me, specifically, Jakob, the director of innovation there, like he was also, I guess, at the point where we all said, yeah, let's make it happen, right? And then we started thinking about different approaches, like what is the best format for the whole thing. And then speaking of sustainability, like the economical sustainability, we just decided, like, let's just spin it off and make it an independent but connected entity, right? Because then it opens up a lot of, first of all, it puts pressure on specifically me to deliver, right? And there is no holding hand that I can kind of reach out to and say, hey, you know what, we're losing money, but why don't you just give us more? So that's one. But the other one is because we are then treated as a startup, we are actually eligible to do things the startup way, which means, maybe we can cut a corner here when it comes to compliance with some whatever little cookie settings on the website, right? And all these things that the startups kind of have to do to be agile and make decisions fast, right? Without, many layers of hierarchy. I mentioned the Danish companies being relatively flat, but there is still hierarchy that you need to go through. There is, if you're, in case of Ramboll, 20,000 people company, compliance is one of the biggest challenges. And then you can imagine, all the things related to branding and so on. If you put it up, any change of copy on your website needs to go through approval, right? Yeah. That's not how a startup can operate.
It'll kill a startup.
It will kill you, right? Yeah. But there's also amazing things, like as a startup, you can apply for different sorts of funding, soft and hard. And that's what we're doing as well, right? And benefiting from that ecosystem. And, the community is also amazing, right? Like there is a lot of builders in the space. You're talking to a lot of these guys, myself as well. And it's just fun to see this. It's not really competition in the negative sense. It's more of this encouragement.
Yeah. Healthy competition.
Right? Exactly, right? But it is healthy, right? Because it's also, that's cool what they're building, right? And then, it means it can be done by a team of 5, for example, right?
Yeah. So this concept of there's a bit of insurance, right, in this, but I think what I'm really hearing is that by separating this entity, by letting go of control from the parent company, it actually enabled this to happen. Because I think this is another really difficult thing for a lot of companies to deal with, which is they want to own IP. They want to own this idea. They want it to be part of their brand. They want to be part of the decision making. But to your point, that also really could snuff out that kind of idea very quickly, because it gets embroiled in red tape and bureaucracy and all, the slow decision-making process and committees and all of, lots and lots of people around the table versus a small team with a guiding star and a passion and a drive and a basically a call to action to make this thing work. And by creating that separation, you're actually saying like we can focus on this because to your point earlier, in an architecture business, when there's a project deadline, it's like all hands on deck. Let's get this fire put out, and then this other thing, you work on it less and less and less and less because there's always more deadlines, right? So creating this layer of separation was a super important strategic initiative that you put in place there.
For sure, and also like imagine everyone needs to have a focus, right? Any organization needs to have one. And then if your primary delivery is architectural design, then you're also going to be hiring through that lens, right? So you prioritize people who are the best architects, the best designers, versus if my primary delivery is a product, digital product, then I have a different lens to hire people, right? And that's just one of these things, right? And there's just multiple decisions that are similar. And I think there is like one thing you asked me about what had to happen. I didn't realize it at the moment how important it was, but now I do. I think the AI revolution, it really made a difference because I do see and it's just every week it's actually getting better. Mm-hmm. And then what required like the level of quality that we have reached with our product today, with the relatively small team, we're right now roughly 5 colleagues. So with the relatively small team that we have today and the quality of the product, I think 2 years ago would have not been possible, right? Yeah. Because every one of us has a multiplier of whatever, 3, 4, 5 agents working with us. And of course there's like, sometimes it looks better, on paper than it actually is, but still like net, I think there's a huge gain there. And I've like looking back, I honestly didn't know what I was signing up for. I thought it would be just like way, way, way less complex, but just managing this complexity right now, I do believe that like jifto is at a much better place today, thanks to, in many ways, to the large language models that we have access to today.
This episode of the TRXL podcast is supported by Avail, and I wanted to share a piece of a conversation I recently had with one of Avail's customers. Check it out. What's something your firm used to rebuild from scratch constantly, something that maybe already existed somewhere, and what was that actually costing you?
That's a tricky question. I don't know. I feel like just there was this, approach for projects to be these sort of like little bespoke endeavors every single time. And they were, precious, and all the constraints were always so unique and different. And I think Avail really got us to shift over to this mindset of this sort of continuity of knowledge and sort of building upon one thing over and over again and continually making those details better. And so I would say the thing that we kept building from scratch was every single project. And now our projects start off from the lessons that we've learned from previous projects. And so that's where I think the mindset shift has really been for us that has saved us a lot of time. And back to what I was saying before, it really increased the employee experience and it sort of reduced a lot of those frustrations of, haven't we done this before? Sort of building this stuff all over again. So
my thanks to Avail for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. Now let's get back to the conversation. This episode of the TRXL podcast is supported by Avail, and I wanted to share a piece of a conversation I recently had with one of Avail's customers. Check it out. What's something your firm used to rebuild from scratch constantly, something that maybe already existed somewhere, and what was that actually costing you?
That's a tricky question. I don't know. I feel like just there was this, approach for projects to be these sort of like little bespoke endeavors every single time. And they were, precious, and all the constraints were always so unique and different. And I think Avail really got us to shift over to this mindset of this sort of continuity of knowledge and sort of building upon one thing over and over again and continually making those details better. And so I would say the thing that we kept building from scratch was every single project. And now our projects start off from the lessons that we've learned from previous projects. And so that's where I think the mindset shift has really been for us, that has saved us a lot of time. And back to what I was saying before, it really increased the employee experience, and it sort of reduced a lot of those frustrations of, haven't we done this before? Sort of building this stuff all over again. So
My thanks to Avail for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. Now let's get back to the conversation. Looking back now, when was the time frame for when you guys officially spun it out?
October last year.
Okay, so before October of last year, you didn't foresee everything that you have now seen, right? In the short time. So what were your blind spots? What did you guys not even consider were going to be something that now you would say, oh, this was a major thing that I didn't see coming?
I think on the product side, there is I had been building internal products for years, right? And so there is some distribution internally, there is some kind of maintenance, customer support, and all this. But just it's a different beast when you go wide, and I believed it's smooth sailing. We have it all figured out. I remember one of these. You can imagine we had multiple slide decks shown to over the negotiations. As I said, like took nine months. And negotiations is maybe not a good word to describe what was happening. It's conversations about how to do it. And then so I remember one of these slide decks, roughly six months before we went out. I said, like, we're 3 weeks away from launch it, and then you just realize, okay, there's just so much more complexity in just the product distribution, development, documentation that needs to happen, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, just I think and probably most founders can relate, is like we're addressing a very narrow niche, right, in the grander scheme of things. Of course, it's the architectural industry, which is already relatively small compared to like the consumer market for whatever smartphones, right? So that's already a small one. But finding specialists in that specific niche who understand our vision for it, right? Because our take is we're not targeting specialists, right? That's I think maybe that's important to mention the backstory of jifto, right? Why did we even decide to do it? Like, why did we focus on sustainability? And it came out of frustration. And the frustration was that like there is almost like a lack of understanding, almost on the language level, between what a designer in the design process needs versus what an engineer understands that they should deliver, right? And there's a mismatch in the language that they speak, kind of like, imagine you're speaking Chinese and I'm speaking Polish, and we kind of like talk past each other. And so finding the people who are specialists in this field, but still speak the language of the designer, and are interested in joining a startup company, being able to translate this whole idea into code. This is like there's so many filters that in the end, and are available, are interested, and so on. Share the same time zone, then suddenly you're just down to a handful of people.
Right.
And then finding these people there, like this was, and still is, a very, very, like one of my biggest focus points right now is finding these kind of people. And now I'm also entering a next stage where we need to, I don't like the word advertising, but just spread the word. And then, like, how do we talk about this product, right? What is the format that resonates with, like the younger audience, the maybe more experienced audience? Something that is not too pushy, but inspiring, engaging, and so on, right? And being able to produce it, and what are the distribution channels, right? All these things essentially just, I guess the boring term would be the product market fit, right?
Yeah.
And finding your distribution channels. But at the same time, it's just about, it comes down to understanding the pain of your people, but also having the team that can really translate it into actually features and into code that we can ship at high quality and high pace, right? So that is I think I genuinely have never anticipated how difficult this is going to be. At the same time, like anyone that asks me, this is my advice. If you're in a position to do it in your life, not everyone is interested, I highly recommend it. I mean, it's amazing. It is amazing. Because then you just feel, I always say I'm both, like my title is a CEO, but I'm a janitor at the same time, right? And it's just kind of like you do everything. Yep. And you learn so much.
That's actually the definition of leadership to me. Like you're a true leader, right? It's like yes, you're leading, you're setting a vision. This is the direction we're going, but you're also serving the people who you work with, and you are the first one in and the last one out, and like that's leadership, and you are incentivized by your passion. Like you want to get up and solve these challenges every day. And it's interesting to kind of go back. You think, I should open up those old slide decks, but at the same time, you don't want to, right? Because there's stuff in there that you'll just cringe about. It's just like, oh, I can't believe we used to think that. But like you said, now you have to do all these jobs. Before, you used to build tools. Now you're doing marketing, product market fit, support, vision. You're doing all of those things, and I think that is one of those things where it's hard to turn a passion into a product, because now you have to think about it from so many angles, and support your team members, and be HR at some level, and attract the right talent, and do all those different things, and it's definitely broadening your scope. But like you said, like you still say, it's if you are in the place to do this, you should do it. It's that transformative.
It is fun, and the odds are against you, right? This is what, like 95% of startups fail, and so it's not about, you kind of have to blend it out, and every day, as I said, just 1% get better. At the same time, be aware of it, right? Because like this is also what fuels you. You cannot, like, it's up to you, right? If I just hope for the best and don't take action, right, then nothing is ever going to happen. So this is one of the drivers as well. But I mentioned I did many things in my past. Like one of them was I trained Taekwondo, so martial arts, for many years, and that's also one of the things that I guess I learned there. It's just, hey, every day you show up, right? You show up training, whether it's whether you're white belt or black belt, doesn't matter. You're there, and it's a fresh start, and you have your chance, and then you just find joy in the process. And I think it's like, that's, at least for now, that's the mindset that I have, right? It's just, especially in the last months and especially the last weeks, as we're getting closer to launch, like I'm interacting with more and more users of the product, right? Mm-hmm. So I get to hear their feedback. I get to see their reactions, and like what gives me such a kick is just them saying, hey, finally, I've been waiting for it, right? And when I hear this, okay, I know, I internally know that we have it, but it's just good to hear this confirmation, right? That we're on this right track. And of course, they also suggest improvements. They ask for more, say, hey, I didn't get this, this could be better. But just the general first impression, like this is what, then I see it lands, and then I know, okay, there's something to it.
I think we should just have like a really long pause right here and let people wait now to really build up the anticipation of what is it. You said when people see it, they know you have it. Like, tell us what jifto is, and talk about kind of, I mean, how did you even get to what jifto is? Maybe we'll talk about what jifto is first, and then talk about maybe how you got there, because obviously you feel like there's a really important hole in the market that this is filling?
Yeah, so Jifto is a personal sustainability assistant. And remember when I mentioned about these two languages and people speaking over each other?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the translation layer to, if you are an engineer, detail-oriented, you're maybe an advanced user, you are able to use it like maybe multiply your skill set, right? And then just be faster, more efficient. We're taking the mundane out of sustainability assessments, right? And when I mean sustainability, we're covering multiple aspects of it, right? So there will be stormwater, there will be wind, microclimate, sunshine, shadows, cut and fill, biodiversity, you name it, right? There's just a growing amount of modules, and they both interact with each other, but can also be treated in isolation. It came from the realization that sustainability means different things for different people, different projects, different geographies. And at the same time, there is sometimes maybe this misconception that, well, you just do it at the end, right? And then you get certified or something like this, right? So we definitely want to pull it forward as much as possible to allow for the iterative exploration with real-time feedback. And as I mentioned, just making it fun. And so that's kind of like for the specialists, right? That's just an let's say multiplier on the output that they would already be able to produce today. But what we really hope to do with it is to reach the audience that had never dared to run any of these studies before. Wind is a good example, right? Historically, I know maybe things have changed a little bit recently, but historically you would have to spend anything from 1 to 5 days setting up the geometry, making sure that it's correctly prepared for the simulation. It's a separate piece of software. It typically runs on a high performance compute cluster in the cloud. You need to be able to set it up, or you need to buy your own server. Like a lot of expenses, a lot of time spent in learning the piece of software. And then each of these iterations takes you 3 to 5 days, right? Yeah. And you want to change something, and depending on the complexity of what you're working on, you had to maybe again spend 2 days, right? And so it's completely detached from the fast-paced decision making that you need to be part of at the early design stages. And then so here, what Jifto does is just like make it super simple, right? You lift just one click, you have your wind simulation running. It's there, it's locally. This is a Rhino plugin, right? So we meet you where you work. There's nothing that you need to, export. Import. Yeah, exactly. Right. And the hope here is that, like, because it's so easy, it's so intuitive, and it's also playful, that we'll gradually get more and more of the audience that has never done it before, right? And there comes a natural decision that we had to make is how complex do we want to make it, right? Because the specialist, they might want to have all their knobs to tweak it and be like super into detail of all these parameters of any given simulation. And it's fine, it's great, and there are probably better tools out there to cover this, right? So our focus is on the Pareto distribution. 80% of the questions out there related to sustainability can probably be answered with like 20% of the tools, right? Mm-hmm. So we are the 80% option, and especially in the early design stages, you just don't know. Yeah. What materials you're going to be using, what tree species you're going to plant, and so on. But you have a general direction, and you want to understand the relative comparisons, right? So if I have my tower in the north corner versus having maybe like a block distribution of my massing, right? What is the difference in shadows, in wind patterns, in microclimate, and so on, right? Yeah. And these kind of questions you can easily answer, empowered by Jifto. Nice. And that's where that's kind of like the base layer. But then there's the other realization is that, again, like the designer speaks, it's an interesting beast, right? They respond to certain stimuli, and one of that is the visual language, right? That a lot of the engineers missed somehow, right? And they're more analytical. And then, so the way we, for example, present you with the results, right? We want it to be engaging, right? We want you to be able to hit one button and then get a 40 pages long report, but it's like 95% images, right? And arranged in a beautiful way, with some diagrams, with some analysis results, with some suggestions what to do. And at any moment in time, and this is where AI comes in, and this assistant idea, you literally just can speak to jifto, right? And it will just see what you see. It would also crunch the numbers in the background and would give you ideas, right? It can both inspire you and just give general guidance. It can tell you, hey, if you want to, this is where you need to click to perform these things, right? ABC, so it will handhold you through the process. But you can also do like this Jarvis interaction, where you're then saying, hey, do it for me while I'm maybe modeling my massing and I'm just shifting it around, and you say, okay, change the wind direction to whatever is the most frequent one for this location. Change the colors, change the analysis type, right? And so you're still focused on what you're doing, and you have this little assistant here sitting on your shoulder that you can always ask questions to, and whenever you feel a little bit insecure, hey, what's the next step, right? Then traditionally you would then call your maybe more senior colleague or wait for an external engineer, right? And sometimes this waiting time would kill the process. And here you have this assistant next to you, or companion, maybe is a better one.
Yeah, that momentum is so important, right? Because when you're in the flow of work, killing that momentum just it does more than just take you away from the thing you're focused on. Right? And so having tools in place that can actually prompt you to what the next thing to do is or how to do it that's a new development in software. Like that, it's just such an interesting new way of working that we're seeing. Yeah. So, okay, so this there's something that I remember from sustainability software, which is, okay, you get the 95-page report, and there's a lot of color-coded charts and graphs and things like that. But the designer doesn't necessarily know what they mean. They might know green is good, red is bad, but there's a lot more information in there. And I feel like has been traditionally kind of a gap in that output and the actual understanding of it so that we can make decisions to optimize, for example. So is this another thing that you've taken on with this assistant idea, where it can actually explain what these things mean to the person who's looking at that report and looking at those graphics? Because a lot of times, like I said, it's like graphics good. Okay, we've got graphics. Okay, now I can move on to the next thing. No, there's actually an interpretation layer that needs to happen there so that we can say, where are we actually landing with this design, and what could we do about it to make it even better?
Correct. And the way we approach it is twofold. We offer courses, both online and in person, to teach the principles, the design principles. And jifto happens to be a piece of software that we use during these workshops. And the ambition here is to share the knowledge, spread the word, but also to listen to people, right? The questions that they ask, and understand better which knowledge gaps exist, and where should we focus on. But then going back to the idea of scaling, that doesn't scale very well, right? Then the courses will become the bottleneck. We still want to do it for many reasons, but at the same time, we want the AI assistant that's built in to be benefiting from these courses more and more, right? So today it has a knowledge base, and it has, it's always also about the system prompt. How do we improve it, and how do we help it guide the designer better in the process? What we also, our bet in this setup is that we will benefit from the large language models development, right? So today is pretty much the worst that they will ever be. in a year to 5 from now, like whatever comes out of the box from Gemini, OpenAI, you name it, these providers, is going to be like by definition probably better, and we're going to be instilling it with our domain expertise maybe, and the connection to like maybe our specific output formats and so on, right? But that's exactly where we want to sit, right? We want to provide this translation layer, which also, like, one of the things that you would see quite often in architectural schools is that every student is required to do site analysis, right? That's one of the exercises, whatever, year 1, 2, 3. But just, okay, so it's again like check, 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 okay, done, and they just set it aside, right? And then it's almost like two different things. And that's probably because there's just no, like, how do you make the connection between, okay, I have this data, but what is the information that I take out of it that translates into actions? And then how do I then check against, so I have my baseline, but how do I know that I have improved upon it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what is it, even like the conversation before that, what should I be improving upon, right? Because that's not necessarily your decision only, right? There's stakeholders around, and then you negotiate that. And there's a lot of like research on, I mean, geodesign, right? Karl Steinitz, it's one of the methods to quickly get to decisions across multiple stakeholders, and to agree on the things that you can agree on, and maybe identifies that you will never agree on, and just don't waste your time on that, right? But ultimately, it just comes down to this working with both quantitative and qualitative feedback, and make it into an iterative loop. Because as mentioned before, like very often these things are detached. The evaluation of your project is detached from the cycles, right? And you just maybe have 3 milestones over multiple design stages, and you just hand over. There's a design freeze. You get your report back. You hand both of them in, and you hope for the best, kind of, right?
Let's take a short break from the conversation to invite you to join the most influential technology leaders in the AEC industry at Confluence. Composed of in-person events and a podcast co-hosted by yours truly, Confluence is designed to foster conversations between AEC firms and technology companies so they can learn, share, and engage with each other to support industry innovation. Software company Avail, which creates content management solutions for the AEC industry, started hosting Confluence events in 2019 to understand what firms are needing, wanting, and thinking around technology. To learn more about Confluence, explore upcoming events, and listen to podcast episodes, go to confluence.getavail.com. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, I mean, the idea of these discrete steps and then you move on is an older way of working. I think we're seeing this more and more now, where the assistant, like you said, the assistant on your shoulder is just kind of watching you work, and it's more of an engine that's continually running as the design process unfolds. And new insights are naturally going to become part of the unfolding process, because decisions are like a butterfly effect, right? You do make this decision. You cannot foresee all of the things that will affect, and it's really kind of reassuring now to see software taking on the role of continually helping you improve the whole process, not just those discrete steps. Okay, we did the site analysis, moving on, right? We never go back and look at the site analysis again, because we tried to assimilate as much of it as we could at the time. But later on, design decisions, they should be going back into that feedback loop and continually updating. I think that it's really interesting. One of the newest things that I became aware of with Claude Code is this insights command. I don't know if you've seen this, insights. It's like, okay, I've been working with Claude Code for however long. You type in the insight command, and it's like, well, here's things that you do a lot. Here's things that you could actually do better. And I think Wow, that's super interesting. Like software traditionally has never done that. You are in so much control that the software doesn't try to get in the way. And not only that, but it's not like tracking what you're doing. And now that software is kind of tracking what you're doing and can actually help you improve on your own process, I think that's fascinating. It's really interesting stuff.
It is, and I'm glad you mentioned the coding world, right? Where you, like whoever works with writing code, augmented by whichever LLM you work with and harness, like you probably have experienced a little bit of the future that will translate to other industries, right?
Right.
And this is such an empowering feeling, right? For a person, and that's another thing, right? Architects are by very nature very creative, right? And then, but they're limited by the processes around, as we talked, right? And then the moment the process disappears, and of course, there's some friction still, right? It's not perfect, but then you see that, hey, you're just you feel free. Your wings, you can stretch them, right? You can fly. And then you just deliver so much more. And, I'm having goosebumps as I'm talking about this, and I'm just writing code, right? But writing code is for me like more of like a means to an end, which is creating the product, which reaches the people. And it's the same thing I can totally imagine, and this is what we aspire to do, to translate this feeling to the architectural world. And one of the reasons why we focus on sustainability is there's another bet here, because there's a lot of startups that work with generative engines for architecture, and we wish them all the best, right?
For geometry, you're talking about like
geometry,
okay.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Start with whatever, an image sketch and so on, translate it into geometry, 3D, 2D plans and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's no one knows who the winner is, but there will be a few of these, right? Our bet in this race is that whatever comes out of their engines, someone still needs to say, is it a good design or not? And there is going to be a qualitative assessment of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably still the human, but then there's also going to be a quantitative one, and
or
that's where we come in,
right?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then so for us, it doesn't matter whether your design has been handcrafted or whether there is a generative pipeline of some optimization solvers that runs a parametric geometry creation pipeline, or whether it's a purely image to 3D or some other maybe unknown to us today, essentially generative pipeline. But we want to be part of this, where we kind of like give you the confidence and maybe help you choose, right? Because if your design creation is free, quote unquote, then you probably would run 100 options instead of free options, or maybe whatever, 15 distinct ones. And then maybe when you go to your stakeholders, local politicians, open public, you want to assure them that we've had these conversations before, right? That we go with maybe 2 or 3 different, like really distinct options, right? Outdoor space, one has a central green corridor that maybe collects stormwater, the other one is a more distributed system and so on. But we then show the numbers from our analysis, and we say both or all of these options, they perform equally well. So we can
Rest
put
assured.
this aside. Exactly.
Yes,
we can
right.
put this aside. Let's talk quality now.
Confidence level is high, right? But yeah, now let's talk about the nuanced things, the things that are more that are less hard number based, but more emotional, or
Yes.
There's all kinds of ways you could talk about that. But yeah, like design should have those kinds of conversations. And it is great to have that confidence kind of score of like, okay, no matter which one you go with, we're good, right?
We're good. We're good. And, as a politician or whoever stakeholder, like if someone's basement gets flooded, they will receive the phone call, right?
Yeah.
So they want to be, they want to rest assured that this is not going to happen, right, on their watch. Or at least be able to document that they did their best to prevent it, right?
Yeah, and so you're reducing their risk, which in turn makes the process go much more smoothly, right? I mean, that's what these kind of projects are all about, is reducing risk for lots of different reasons, like not just your own professional risk, but for so many reasons, to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, but also the reputation of the people making the decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So
It's one and
go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, because sometimes that's also one of my favorite memories from like interacting with clients as a project engineer. There was a conversation about it's in the southern climate in Switzerland. Summers get way too hot, and then the obvious thing to do would be to plant a row of trees in the street to provide more shade. But this also meant that they had to remove, I believe, 8 or 10 parking spaces, right? Which is never popular. And then so there was a lot of conversation back and forth, and then we're able to show them through thermal comfort analysis before and after, right? If we plant these trees, it's going to reduce the perceived temperature by 8 degrees, right? And this was the thing that they needed to go to the open public and say, hey guys, we're taking something away, but we're giving something back, right?
Yeah.
And that was an argument that in the end, like, it can be a boring analysis, but it can also be seen as something that enables, your stakeholder to reach a decision, right? That they actually wanted to push through, right?
Yeah. So you have built, you said, a Rhino plugin. Jifto's a Rhino plugin to meet designers where they are in the software that they're using on a day-to-day basis. Let's talk a little bit about that and why you didn't build, I think you've already kind of given the reason, but you didn't build a standalone product. You don't have to import, export. But we're also seeing a world in which it's never been easier through APIs and MCPs and all these things for different things to talk to each other. There's other costs associated with that, right? Now we're seeing token usage and all of these kinds of things really exploding. Let's talk about kind of why you chose to go that direction, and maybe now looking back, do you still feel like it was a good direction to go?
I think it was a great start, and this is how we always saw it, that Rhino is our platform to begin with.
Like a home base, yeah.
Yes, and the reason for that is, first of all, we're very familiar with it, as are a lot of other architectural offices.
Sure.
There's a typical split between early and later design stages. Rhino tends to be more used to in early design stages, and then later you switch over to some sort of BIM offering platform, whether it's Revit, ArchiCAD, you name it. We believe that sustainability is part of the design process throughout, but the biggest gains are to be ahead in the early design stages. Mm-hmm. So Rhino was also an obvious choice to be there. It has also, from a developer point of view, it has a very vibrant developer community. Mm-hmm. The people from McNeil, the company behind Rhino, they are super open, very helpful, have a great API. So for us, it made a lot of sense to start there. And as much as we love Rhino and appreciate their contribution to the industry, we also understand that it's a relatively niche product, right? Mm. Depending on the geography, might be more popular or less, but it's roughly 150 to 200,000 architects that would be somehow exposed to Rhino, out of roughly 4 million architects in the world, right? So that just gives you the perspective. And our aim is to definitely make it more accessible, make jifto more accessible.
Okay.
And there's multiple ideas that we have. One of them is we will have our own API so that all these products that I mentioned before, right, the ones maybe focused on offering, generating designs, they could talk to us, right, so that we can become, and again, we believe in meeting you where you are already. So if you're working with SketchUp, we want to be part of that workflow, right? If you're working with some other, whatever, Blender, right, maybe this is the MCP route that we would be able to do. And there's a lot of web-based tools as well, right? So this is something where we definitely keep an eye on, and we have some active development on that end. At the same time, it's still that there's this mismatch, right? Because you have to switch environments, right? Assuming you're working with SketchUp, and then you would have to export something to your browser, do analysis there, and go back. It definitely makes the developers' work easier. You just have one platform to support, and you're good, right? You push your updates on your schedule. You don't have to deal with any local setups and so on. But I just don't feel that it makes the user's life easier. And depends. Like I'm very open to this.
It depends who you are too. Like if you're a project manager, maybe you're not going to be in Rhino, but you are going to be on the easy. You got Chrome open all the time. So it kind of depends on who's part of the conversation, who's driving, or who's watching.
That's true. And I'm also like, I think that we still, that things are evolving so fast.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned the token usage across different industries right now. And what is the agentic version architectural design? Like, where does it happen, right? Is it maybe some sort of like command line interface, especially when it comes to like assessments, right? The geometry is created in one place, and then, all these agents, they would just connect to whatever API we provide for them, and then it will serve the results back to the user wherever they happen to be, right? Mm-hmm. So it could be that this traditional way of thinking in terms of plugins will not be relevant in the future. I might be completely wrong. Maybe it's like dedicated plugins that are everywhere because they're so cheap to make, right? Could be that. But at the same time, like I don't know yet what is the next step meaningful and like beyond Rhino, and we want to hear it from the community, right? We want to start with Rhino and then ask an open question: where would you guys like us to be next, right? And follow that.
So you're talking to a lot of users who are using your jifto, and I'm curious if you could give a couple of examples or just the overall sense of them doing things that you never imagined them doing with your software, or asking for. I mean, that to me has got to be one of the more exhilarating parts of creating something and putting it out there for others to then react to. And it's like, to go back to your Steve Jobs analogy, when they introduced the iPad for developers, they're like, we have no idea what you're going to do with this. Right. And I think there's something interesting about that. It's like, we made this thing that is now a tool for you to do stuff with, and we don't know what that stuff is. We have some ideas, but we know you're going to have way more ideas that we never thought of. I bet that's kind of an exhilarating part of developing software, and then hearing back from those users and them starting to drive the roadmap of where you may or may not go.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll start maybe with the less surprising. It's just the scale of projects, right? Like, or the range of typologies that people apply it to. And like literally from like single residential houses, and then we have this wind simulation model. So then the question is, hey, if I open the windows, can I simulate natural ventilation through this little house, right? And of course you can, right? It just, when we were developing this module, we're thinking more of an urban scale simulation, right? But it turns out, yeah, of course, I mean, the physics is the same. You just tighten the grid and it'll open the windows in the model and it just flows through it. But on the other end, we have colleagues. This tend to be from the first example was from smaller offices, versus the bigger offices would then ask, hey, I'm working on this whole city master plan, and then your wind simulation is actually maybe not even fitting on my local graphics card, right? And then so how can we improve that? And now we have a way forward with allowing you to do like really, really large simulations also locally and spread it across. Maybe it takes longer, but you can still deliver it, right? So that's just the range of applications within the industry. But I had people from automotive design who also used the wind tunnel, right, to tweak their both motorcycles and cars. Literally yesterday, I had a super fun conversation with a person who is working with mycelium in the soil and then she wanted to simulate the wind and flow and the evaporation rate of a soil meter by meter, right? So kind of this piece of land, just to see how it would affect the mycelium growth underground.
Wow.
And that was like, that blew my mind, because there's like an application that I don't think jifto is really meant to do. She said she will give it a shot anyway, and let's see what comes out of that. But I think, to me, this is more symptomatic of the thesis I formulated earlier, that a lot of people are just limited by lack of tools, and they have these creative ideas, but they are just like unable to go beyond, like, or to reach their full potential, maybe professionally, because there's just this limit. And I was almost heartbroken to bring it to her that probably jifto will not support or not help her solve this specific problem. But I'm just thinking, when I think of her, I'm just thinking of the remaining 3 million architects that that every single day just bang their head against some stupid
something.
Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting to think
limitation.
about now with the potential of, like you were saying, like there's these limitations. And I think for now, right, like we are rapidly approaching a point at which people can create their bespoke tool to do that very specific thing. And then it kind of takes us full circle to, like, you guys, that's what you did. You created these tools for your designers in-house to do this thing, and then it spawned this whole initiative, this whole endeavor, this business to bring it outside of the doors of Henning Larsen and go global, right? I mean, it's absolutely, I mean, that potential is only increasing across the board right now. It's pretty amazing.
It is, and I'm excited to see what people come up with, and it's, I mentioned this before, that it's such a liberating experience when you see that. There's also this saying, right, that sufficiently advanced engineering is indistinguishable from magic, and back in the days, the wizards or whatever mages, they would just work with forces of nature, right, and knew how to bend them. But I mean, this is what engineers do, right? We know how to leverage physics to create structures in the world and make them last and so on. Same for software engineering, right? It is a beauty. I mean, one of the beautiful parts about architecture is that you are creating spaces that manifest themselves, right, in the physical world.
Right.
The beauty of software engineering is that you're creating ideas or translating ideas into digital products that people interact with, right? So you are changing someone else's lives and behaviors and so on. But the feedback loop is so much faster with software than it is with the real world atoms, right? And so you get this kick after kick after kick, right? And then, and especially now when you can be like, feel so liberated because you like, I hear it from a lot of my peers, they were just so intensely working right now, but it just feels like it's like a rush, right? Because you don't have to troubleshoot like some weird missing comma or something else in your lines of code, right? You're just like seeing the thoughts being translated into new features, and then you hear your users' feedback, and then you know, okay, this is working, this is what they wanted, right? And that's why I'm super excited to see what other people are going to do, because I also I'm definitely on part of the crowd that's very optimistic about the future, because I also know how much it takes to actually focus on a product and deliver it to a quality that hopefully meets the expectations of other people. Because what you said, I think there's going to be a lot of, okay, I have this one-off thing that helps me solve this one specific problem, but there is still a long, long way from this to distributing something to others that they would generally find value in, and also staying behind it, being someone who wants to dedicate their life
right
to doing this, right?
I think there's something in there too about that rush that you talked about not having to find the comma that's missing because nothing works. But that rush translates into, it's like the design process. When morale is high, when the culture is good at the firm, it's like all of these kind of, lesser quantifiable things actually make for a better built environment, right? And so that's one, like you're building better software that's making people happier, and those happier people are building better projects. And all of that is feeding into the bigger ecosystem of the built environment. And I think that is actually something not to sleep on. That to me, it's literally improving everything at a scale that is hard to see, but at some point it's going to be obvious. And it's going to be like, a really cool side effect of, people being really satisfied with the work that they're doing and the tools and all of these things that are, have been hard to get through in previous times. Like you said, there's architects beating their heads against the wall all the time with their tools. And that is creating blocks in the process that doesn't get the outcome to maybe where it could potentially go, and those are being removed. And I think that's a super interesting thing that's happening in our world right now.
Well, when I think it's again this connecting the dots approach. And at the beginning of our conversation, I mentioned this New York City Central Park and people kissing there, right? And now as you were saying this, I just realized that the reason, I am building jifto, that's my personal motivation, is so that architects can build these spaces for people to kiss in, right?
Yeah.
And that's the butterfly effect that I'm trying to kickstart.
Very cool. Mariusz, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for opening the curtain and showing people kind of what you've been through over the last 13 years, but even more importantly, since last October. And we'll have links to jifto and where people can follow you on LinkedIn and et cetera in the show notes for this episode. I hope people take the time to check it out and support what you're doing with kudos, and comment on this episode. Let me know what you thought about this conversation. Mariusz, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
If you watched all the way to the end, thank you. That actually means a lot. I have two things I'd ask of you before you go. One, hit subscribe right now if you haven't already. It's totally free. It takes one click, and I'm really trying to get to 1,500 subscribers. We're not there yet, and every single one counts. If this show has been worth your time, that's the easiest thing you can do. Number two, if you want to go further, if you want to support independent coverage of this industry and get ad-free episodes of the podcast, plus my full Leadership Edge newsletter, head over to trxl.co and click the join button. The link is in the show notes. $12 a month, and you'll be one of the people who actually makes this possible. All right, that's a wrap. Subscribe, share it with someone who would get it, and I'll see you in the next one.